Nugget let her tongue soak up the rushing air from the Land Rover's open windows for the short journey to the church. He parked opposite the Victorian version of the consecrated site, built on red sandstone and slate, to replace the dilapidated Tudor structure. The church stood proudly watching over the lake beyond, and Conrad came here often to absorb the stillness of her grounds. In the summer, there were huge shady canopies under which to sit. In the winter, there were sheltered benches to spend time upon, contemplating anything that took his fancy. He rarely saw anyone else, except the Reverend, if he was up at this hour. Nugget jumped out of the Land Rover and ran straight over the road to the gate. Conrad paused. In all her 11 years, she'd never done that. Every morning she jumped out of the passenger seat and waited at his heel until he signalled for her to cross the road. Conrad looked at the seat, wondering if she was losing her ability to hold on. He looked for a stain, but there was none. He shrugged and closed the door. He never locked it. He was perplexed and tutted. He liked routine. He looked both ways and down the lane, then crossed to where Nugget was sitting. She stood up and began to bark, turning round and round as if she sniffed a trail. "You seen a squirrel, Nugget?" he asked. He opened the gate, and the dog shot off into the churchyard, with Conrad following, shaking his head. She must be chasing something, he thought. The barking got louder, and Conrad chuckled. Those damned cheeky rodents, they tease us so. He spotted a fat grey sat at the top of a branch, goading the canine, as it devoured nuts and cared nothing for the chaos it was causing to Conrad's morning. He followed the barking. It was in the same direction as Ada's gravestone, anyhow. He had commissioned a bench to be placed in front of her, so he could stay as long as he wished without stiffening up. In colder months, he brought a blanket and a flask of tea. He continued around the church to where he thought the barking was coming from, and he thought that it might be under the massive old oak that stood majestically to the east of the church entrance, guarding the graveyard. It had been just as big when he was a young lad, singing in the choir, and his father had said that it was more than 500 years old. Conrad half expected Reverend Neil to come out, asking what all the fuss was about. But then he remembered that Neil was away in Whitehaven, on some diocesan conference. He wasn't a bad egg, the Reverend. They'd had worse. He was a decent chap who always had time for his flock. Not that Conrad counted himself as one of the flock. Not since Ada had died. He shielded his eyes against the sun, which rose quickly at this time of year. It shone a deep orange and made him squint. It was going to be another belter of a day. He shouted the dog's name over again. He'd never known Nugget to be so disobedient. Her barks grew louder, and Conrad was sure now it was coming from the oak tree. He took 2 more steps, but then stopped. Nugget's barking rang in his ears, and Conrad swayed slightly. He rubbed his eyes and took another step, and then he was sure. He held on to the dry stone wall, and his eyes continued around the churchyard to see if anyone else was about. He was alone. Well, sort of. The flask slipped from his grasp, and he covered his mouth.